Next is Breece Hall, who's been very disappointing this season, but he has an incredible schedule the rest of the way, including the playoff schedule, which is number 1 for running backs. Jacksonville, the Rams, and Buffalo. Mixed in there are the Colts next week. This is just, in general, a great schedule the rest of the way for Breece Hall, and he's number 4 on my list. This is a great bounce-back opportunity for Jared Goff, and I think if you have Goff, this is a great play for this week. I would definitely put Jared Goff into your lineup, especially in 2 quarterback leagues. But even in 1 quarterback leagues, I think this is a great stream. If he is still out there, I would pick him up and play him against Jacksonville, despite the 5-interception game last week.
Rodgers looking left, now comes back over the middle to Hall. He's got some room to run. First down, Hall, 10, 5, touchdown! In 3, Adams in motion. Breece Hall, right side. He's got the first down and more. Inside the 10, dives for the pylon, and it's a touchdown!
And Goff against the blitz, one of the best in the NFL. Here he is, 3rd and 7, crumble pocket. It's St. Paul for 6. Ducking down in 4. Blocked there by Silstra. It's caught by Jamison Williams. There he goes. Foot race with Miller. Foot race with Savage. That is 6 for number 9.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Fantasy Football 201. In today's video, we're going to look ahead to Week 12. We're going to talk guys to pick up at each position. We're going to talk drop candidates. We're also going to talk some hold candidates too that you may want to drop, but you actually should hold on to. And then players that I'm looking at based on how they performed in Week 11 that I think could be reliable fantasy assets for you the rest of the season. So if you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to my channel and drop any comment that you have about your fantasy football team. I reply to all my commenters. My goal is to help you guys win a fantasy football championship. So please take advantage with this small channel and subscribe and ask away with any questions that you have. And let's do all that we can to help you guys win your leagues this year. All right, so I hope everybody had a good Week 11. A lot of high-scoring games this week, so hopefully you guys had some good outcomes today. And we've got a big week coming up this next week because we have 6 teams on a bye. So we are going to return with our buy or bye segment. So we're back with our instinct drop again. We have 6 teams on a bye this week. We've got the Atlanta Falcons, Buffalo Bills, Cincinnati Bengals, Jacksonville Jaguars, New York Jets, and New Orleans Saints. So 6 teams, quite a bit of heavy-hitting fantasy assets that you've been relying on, and a lot of fraudulent assets, namely Aaron Rodgers. I always like to take advantage of any opportunity I can to make fun of him because that guy is just so insufferable, man. I apologize to any Rodgers fans out there, but he's got to just retire. And we'll get to his team in just a minute. But if you're not familiar with this buy or buy segment, basically what it is do you want to buy? For those of you that could still trade, do you want to trade for this player? In the case of if they're on waivers, do you want to buy them and pick them up? Or do you want to say buy as if it's safe to drop them on their bye week? Because at this point in the season, you got a lot of players on bye, and you've got to really make strategic moves on your roster about who you want to have on your team and who you can part ways with. So we will start with the Atlanta Falcons. And the key point that I want to make with Atlanta is that they have a very difficult schedule for the next 3 weeks. Just 2 weeks if you're factoring in the bye. They come out of this bye, and then they've got the Los Angeles Chargers, which is an excellent defense, and then they have the Minnesota Vikings, which is the #1 fantasy defense on the season. So this means that, but the thing with Atlanta is that they do have a nice playoff schedule. They get Washington, the Giants, and the Las Vegas Raiders. So if you could hold on to these players and you're in a winning position, it may be beneficial to do that because they may have good matchups for the playoffs. But there's going to be some decisions you need to make with some of these guys if you're in a position where you need to get into the playoffs now. So we'll start at quarterback, Kirk Cousins. Rough game. You could easily say bye-bye to him. He's not somebody worth rostering right now, but I think that he's somebody that could be interesting as the season goes along. But I'm honestly not convinced that it's going to be Kirk Cousins. If Kirk Cousins continues to struggle like he has, they may give Penix a look. But Kirk Cousins can be dropped right now. Bijan Robinson is a buy on his bye week. If you can still trade for him, I would recommend doing so. Down week. And yes, he does have a tough schedule with Los Angeles and Minnesota coming up, but this is still a top 10 running back rest of season. And I have him in my rankings as a top 5 running back. And you can check out that video that I made last week, which ranks out all the running backs that I have rest of season. So he's a great buy candidate on his bye week. But Tyler Allgeier is a drop. Wide receivers. So Drake London to me is a relative buy off of a bad game, but I think this one is record dependent. I did have a commenter who asked about whether or not they should trade Drake London to get George Pickens. And in that situation, he's 4-6, needed to roll off some wins this week. So in this case, I recommended Pickens because not only does Pickens not have a bye like Drake London, but over the next 3 weeks after this after this Ravens matchup, he gets Cleveland, Cincinnati, and then Cleveland, which are all very poor pass defenses. So there's a real opportunity for Pickens to roll off some good wins here over the next few weeks for your team. So what do you do with Darnell Mooney? Bad game, also is injured right now. I would be trying to hold on to him. He's been too successful this season, and I think that he can be a good asset in the playoffs. But I think for now he is a sit until he starts putting up numbers again. And then Ray McCloud and everybody under him on the depth chart can be dropped. Kyle Pitts. So this is an interesting discussion of what you do with Kyle Pitts because has had very up and down performances this season as he's had his entire career. And if you're on a bye, and if you're in a situation where you don't have a lot of options out there on waivers, you have a winning record, I would recommend holding on to Pitts. But if you have a losing record or about 500 and you need to get a win, and some of the guys I'm going to talk like Jonnu Smith, Taysom Hill, Will Disley are out there, then I would put strong consideration to dropping Kyle Pitts on his bye. And then the defense and Younghoe can both be dropped. I will talk about kickers at the end. I have a segment that I'm excited to talk about with kickers and why they think they're overrated. But Younghoe has been a good kicker this season, but he is a easy drop for me on this bye week. All right. Buffalo Bills. You obviously are buying Josh Allen. I doubt anybody's going to sell him to you, but he's somebody that I think if you can take advantage of anything that you can to get him, he's my number 3 quarterback rest of season. That includes guys like Jared Goff, who was number 1 for this week, or Joe Burrow, who's been doing great. I would trade both of those guys in some sort of package to get Josh Allen. James Cook is a relative buy, but he is a little more concerning to me than he has been in recent games because there's now starting to become a 3 running back committee with Ty Johnson getting a lot of snaps this week and a lot of the third down plays. I'm not really worried about Cook in terms of his ability to be a top 20 running back rest of season, but kind of a weird game for him where he wasn't running very effectively. It wasn't really getting the snap share that you'd like. I think that both Ray Davis and Ty Johnson can be dropped on their bye, though. Khalil Shakir, so at the wide receiver position, Khalil Shakir is the only wide receiver to me that is worth rostering through this bye week. A lot of teams are on bye, and yes, that includes Amari Cooper. Amari Cooper has been a major disappointment in fantasy this season. And to me, I do not think that you need to roster him at this point. This team has multiple different weapons they could use. Cooper did have 2 nice catches in this game, but I think it's going to turn into something where he's going to give you a great game and then he's going to follow it up with a bad game. And I personally would just rather stay out of that business and not have Amari Cooper on my roster. And if I do cost myself 1 game where he goes off for 20 points, I would rather have somebody that I know consistently is going to be involved rather than Amari Cooper, who's dealing with injuries, has an incredibly low floor, and generally is just more hype than the value that he's going to give you. Dalton, Kincaid, and Dawson Knox can both be dropped on their bye weeks. The Bills' defense should not be dropped, though. And usually with defenses, I don't talk holding them through their bye weeks, but I think the Bills have to be held. And that's because the Bills have a very nice schedule for the fantasy semifinals and championships. They have the New England Patriots in week 16 and the New York Jets, which by that point, they're definitely going to be in shambles. So I would, he's going to get them in week 17. So the Bills defense, make sure you try to hold on to them through the bye week, because this could be the defense that helps you win the championship this season. And for those of you that seed your co-managers in your leagues, other league mates that you have drop the Bills, make sure you have a spot to pick them up, because this is a great counter move to pay attention to the guys that are dropped in the Bills defense. Some managers may not have the space to hold them. Make sure that you do, because this defense is really going to make some money for you at the end of the fantasy playoffs. Tyler Bass can be dropped, which is the theme of all these kickers today. All right, Cincinnati Bengals. Joe Burrow to me is a buy, and that's pretty clear and obvious. Number 4 quarterback for me rest of season. Chase Brown is also a buy, and this guy is he looks to me like Austin Eckler did in his prime when he was with the Los Angeles Chargers. They're utilizing him with the full workload now. They have not really integrated Khalil Herbert. And Chase Brown, to me, he was number 11 on my list. And I think that it's arguable that he could be top 10 rest of season at this point. So he looks great. He does have a tough matchup rest of season, but I think based on this game and the Chargers, I'm not really too worried about that moving forward, because Chase Brown is just too good for this team. That I think that he's going to be involved every game, and he's going to give you a very consistent floor. Jamarr Chase is an obvious buy candidate on his bye week. T. Higgins, I would not give up the house to try to buy T. Higgins on this bye week personally, because we have not seen him consistently be on the field, and he's great when he does play, but I do think that you'd be giving up a lot to get him right now that I don't really think would be worth it just for the fact that he's not playing this week. The other wide receivers like Iosivas, Jermaine Burton, etc. can all be dropped. Mike Gesicki and the other tight ends can be dropped as well. Gesicki is not relevant when T. Higgins is healthy. So if you pick up Gesicki based on that Raiders game a couple weeks back, you can send him to the waivers for this week on his bye week. The defense can be dropped, and then Evan McPherson can be dropped as well. So I will be talking about him later, but in terms of like kicker rankings and how kickers are rated too high that should not be drafted where they are. And McPherson is a prime example of that. He should not be rostered through this bye week, regardless of where you took him in the draft. So stay tuned to the end of this video. I'll have a timestamp for my kicker segment, as I have with all my positions, and I'll talk about McPherson in more depth. All right, Jacksonville. So if you had Mac Jones, you're dropping him. Trevor Lawrence, to me, could be dropped too, because right now there's too many quarterbacks that are playing well. And even though Lawrence had a stretch where he was effective for a while, this is the time of the year where you've got to win your matchups. And Trevor Lawrence is not. We don't know when he's coming back. We don't know if he's coming back. So he's not worth rostering, because he had a nice stretch in the middle of the season where he was putting up 20 points consistently. He could be safely bye-bye and sent to the waivers. All right, the running backs. So Travis Etienne. This is a cautionary tale of somebody who was taken in the second round and has been an absolute bust this season. What do you do with him going into his bye week? Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If you need a win, let's say that you're 6-5 or less, you're not guaranteed to get into the playoffs. Travis Etienne is not helping you right now. You got to get some guys that can help you win your week 12. And Travis Etienne currently has been playing bad. He's got a bye week. There is some hope that he can, regain the starting role and be relevant again as a elite running back like he was last year. But he's just not cutting it for you right now. So in my opinion, he's only worth rostering for those teams that know they're going to get in the playoffs and want to take a shot on him later. Because after the bye week, he's got Houston, which is a tough defense. He's got the Tennessee Titans, which is another tough run defense. And really, he doesn't get a great schedule until the end in week 16 when he gets Las Vegas. So if you're holding out in that, you're in the playoffs and you want to consider Etienne as a stream that you could put in there in your flex in week 16, by all means do that. But if you need wins, I would recommend to cut Travis Etienne and get somebody that can help you right now. Same applies to take Bigsby, but he was probably not rostered right now anyway, given his injuries and the team play in general. Wide receivers, the only one that is worth rostering still is Brian Thomas Jr., and I think that he is a relative buy, but I would not be actively trying to get him onto my roster. I would just, because right now I wouldn't really feel comfortable starting him as long as Mac Jones is there. But at least this Detroit game gave me encouragement that he can still give you a productive stat line despite Mac Jones. And then kind of the same thing with Evan Engram. I haven't sold my stock on Evan Engram as a top 10 tight end rest of season. I think that he will have some better matchups going forward with Detroit. But I do think that if you're kind of in that same situation with Etienne where you need a tight end, I think Evan Engram can be dropped. Wouldn't want to do it. I would feel if I had to choose between dropping Etienne or Engram on my roster, I would drop Etienne over Evan Engram. But man, this team has just really been an absolute dud for fantasy aside from Brian Thomas Jr. pretty much the entire season. The Jets, speaking of dud fantasy teams, Aaron Rodgers can't be dropped safely. He is not performing very well. I had him in my top 20 as the number 20 quarterback rest of season, but that may have been a little favorable to his legacy because right now he's honestly just not playing like that at all. He could be dropped. Breece Hall should be bought on his bye, and as I've talked about multiple times over the last few weeks, he's got the number one strength of schedule for running backs. You're going to have to pay a hefty price now after that game that he had today, yesterday. But I really like Breece Hall. If somebody is not willing to hold on to him through the bye week and willing to sell him, I would be all over trying to trade for him if you're in leagues that can still trade. And then Braylon Allen, I think, is somebody that you should try to hold on to if you have Breece Hall to have both of them through the bye weeks. But really pay attention if he's dropped because, as I said, he's already 20% rostered in ESPN leagues, so he is widely available. Could be a sleeper if anything happens to Breece. Wide receivers, Garrett Wilson and Devontae Adams have not been putting up elite numbers as of recent weeks. I'm not entirely worried about them necessarily. I wouldn't really be actively trying to buy them. But I do think that you don't have to be in the mode of selling them either. I would hold and just, hope that they can develop some rapport over the next few weeks. Defense and kicker can be dropped from the Jets. The New Orleans Saints, last team on a bye for this week. Derek Carr is a drop. I know he's been playing well of late, but I don't think that it's justifiable to hold on to him at this time. I think you can find some other quarterbacks out there that can help you more in the moment. Alvin Kamara, definitely a buy candidate. This was a down week for him where he had a lot of touchdown opportunities that were kind of taken back and then eventually went to Taysom Hill. I don't project it will always be that way, and I think Alvin Kamara, he still got 16 carries, 4 receptions. I think he's going to be fine. I'm not really too worried off this game where he kind of had a down week. And then wide receivers. So all the wide receivers I do not think necessarily have to be rostered on the bye week except for Chris Olave. I would still hold out hope if you got an IR spot. Leave him there. Maybe he can get involved as the season goes along. Because they also do have a nice schedule to end the season. They got Washington in week 15. The Packers are a little bit of a difficult matchup for in terms of the defense to start the season, but they've been struggling of late. And then they get the Vegas Raiders in week 17. So for the New Orleans Saints, this could be very sneaky for picking up their guys. So Marquez Valdez-Scantling is starting to creep into that range. I'll talk about him more in a little bit, where maybe you do want to consider him in your startable category just because of the lack of other options there. But I think that he's more of a sell candidate off of these 2 games. That being said, I think if you can pick him up and try to sell him in a last-minute trade, I think that would be worth it. But I'm not really a fan of the archetype of his player in terms of rostering them, especially through a bye week. Tight end, Taysom Hill. I was wrong about Taysom Hill for this week, but I do stand by the fact that, this guy is the king of DFS dart throw, where and he's done this throughout his career where he has these blow up games like he had on Sunday, and he follows it up with absolutely nothing. I personally do not want to play that game of trying to take the Taysom Hill risk, but the argument for him right now is that they really do not have anybody else to go to on the team aside from Kamara and then Marquez Valdez-Scantling because of all the injuries. So this time around, it is a little more intriguing in the fact that he got 10 targets this past game. He also had 7 carries in which he had 138 and 3. So the rushing yards to me are like, that's kind of a fluke. I don't really see that happening every week. But if he's getting 10 targets for 8 receptions, 50 yards, that's a startable tight end right there. So if they continue to utilize him the way they did in week 11, he becomes a very intriguing player rest of the season. But I'll just read you his numbers throughout the season, which is not including the injuries. 4 points, 2 points, 14 points, 6 points, 16, 17, and then 42. So this was a crazy outlier game for Taysom Hill. He could do it again, but at the same time, I don't think it's worth busting the bank to try to get this guy on his bye week because for all we know against the Rams in week 13, he could have another 6-point game or something. But, the volume could be there because of all the injuries. I'll talk about that a little bit more when we get to the tight end segment. And then the defense and kicker can be dropped on the Saints. All right, so we will go to the quarterback position. So we're not going to focus as much on buy-sell because a lot of the trade deadlines have passed. We're going to be focusing more on the ad drops and then how I'm viewing the guys on the fringe. Are you holding them? And then what players am I looking at despite some poor performances, bad matchups? Are we going to believe this game where they went off? Which ones do I feel confident putting in for this next week? We'll do kind of a preview of that. We'll go more in depth in our start sit later into the weekend as we've done throughout the year. And as always, comment any questions that you have. And let me know if you prefer the live segment or if you prefer the Saturday video where it's pre-recorded. So let me know in the comment section below what you think of that. And we will go to the quarterbacks. So first of all, I'm going to talk the quarterbacks that you want to make sure that you pick up first and foremost if they're out there, because these two quarterbacks are top 10 performers on the season and should be rostered more than they are. So first of all, if Bo Nix is out there, Bo Nix is only rostered at 69% of ESPN leagues. That should be up in the 90s to 100s range. Bo Nix is playing great. He's the quarterback 7 on the season right now. So he's playing excellent. Make sure if he is out there that you grab him because he is starting to get into that range now where he's just a set it and forget it type of guy. He gets Vegas next week, so I expect more of the same. This is a must-start player, and it was one of the guys that I had featured earlier in my under 40% rostered guys that should be picked up. So hopefully you took advantage of that. But he is out there in a lot of leagues, so if you have him, this is an excellent start for this week. So number 1 ad if he's there. Number 2 ad if he's there is Jared Goff, and much for the same reason. Goff was somebody I really liked for this upcoming week, or for this past weekend, because he had a down week. A lot of people may have dropped him, but he was getting Jacksonville, which is a horrendous defense. And then next week he gets Indianapolis, which has not exactly been an excellent defense either. So Jared Goff, check if he's out there, because if both him or Bo Nix are there, and Goff is only 57% rostered, make sure that you have them for this week, because I think that they will both be startable players for week 12. So then after that, I'm going to separate the players that you add at quarterback in terms of first, I'm going to go shallow league, deep league. So I'll start with the shallow league guys. And I'm going to start with the teams that are, you have a winning record, you're trying to hit a home run. And the player that you want to pick up in that situation is Anthony Richardson. So this game, to me, I do not buy it as the norm going forward for him. And that is because the Jets are a dysfunctional team. Their defense is overrated. They've got some more difficult matchups coming up, plus a bye. They've got Detroit in week 12. They get New England in week 13. Then they have the bye week, and then they have Denver. So I think this game against Detroit is really going to tell the tale for Anthony Richardson. So if you're a team that needs to start racking up some wins, you could take the risk with Anthony Richardson, but I would rather not go there and go with somebody safer like a Jared Goff, for example. So with that being said, if you have a winning record though, and let's say that like you've been able to get by with somebody like Baker Mayfield or a Brock Purdy or something like that, that gives you consistent enough points that gives you numbers that you're happy with, but you're trying to go for that elite upside of somebody that you could stash, then this would be the player that you'd want to add at quarterback, because Anthony Richardson, if he's figured it out, like maybe he humbled himself with his benching and now the coaching staff is all in on his ability to run the ball. I think that it would be worth taking a shot on it. Worst thing that happens, it doesn't affect your starting lineup and you can just cut him if these performances aren't the norm. But that would be the move to make if you have a winning record and you have a spot for quarterback. If you're trying to play it safe, though, for this week and just get a win and that I think has some great matchups for you, that would be good streaming options. The player that I would try to pick up is Tua. Tua had a productive game against the Vegas Raiders this week. And then for this upcoming week, he gets the New England Patriots, who just gave up massive fantasy performance to the Los Angeles Rams, the receiving core, Matt Stafford, etc. So there's a good possibility that we could see Tua get back on the pine against the New England Patriots. And another quarterback to consider as well, if you're looking a little more longer term, is Drake May. Drake May has Miami in that same game. And then he has Indianapolis, which has been a defense that's struggled throughout the season as well, too. So I think both Tua and Drake May are both good options if you are trying to roll off some W's in terms of the streaming options at quarterbacks. Both those guys are under 50% rostered. So if you're in more of the deeper leagues, the guys that you want to look at, Caleb Williams to me would be that potential play because he did have a more productive game and he's not really in the range where you would want to start him unless you're in a 2-quarterback league. But the hope is that, with the new OC, he gets his rhythm back and he could, because remember a couple weeks back in week 5 or 6, he was the number 1 quarterback on the week. So the potential is definitely there. I think that with Shane Waldron, it just put them in a huge funk. So that's the potential play I would go with. If you're just looking for more depth, I think that it wouldn't be a bad idea to go with Stafford. I just don't really feel that Stafford is going to be a great play this week against the Philadelphia Eagles. So I would not really be trying to start Matthew Stafford, but in a 2-quarterback league, I think that is acceptable. And then more of the potential plays as well. Will Levis, as I've already talked about, has a great fantasy schedule, and he did put up respectable enough numbers against Minnesota. He had 15.6, which is only 0.2 points less than Patrick Mahomes, actually. Will Levis has a gold mine of a schedule in the fantasy playoffs in the weeks leading up to it. He's starting in, this would be week 13. He's got Washington, he's got Jacksonville, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, and then Jacksonville again, which is about as good as a fantasy schedule as you can get for the playoffs. So Will Levis is definitely interesting. And then also Tommy DeVito has been promoted to quarterback, the starting quarterback for the New York Giants. Daniel Jones is benched, so he will be a drop candidate I'll talk about in just a sec. But DeVito is interesting because he does have a lot of mobility, and they're playing the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week, which has not been a great defense. So there is an argument to be made that DeVito could be effective running the ball and could actually be a decent stream option in the deepest of leagues. So take a look and see if he's out there, because especially if they could figure out a way to get his legs going and get him running the ball like they did last season, he could be a sneaky stream too. Drop candidates, Daniel Jones, cut him. Doesn't look like he's going to play again this season. Aaron Rodgers, drop him. As I've already said, Kirk Cousins, same thing. So the guys on the fringe, CJ Stroud, if he puts up another performance where he goes under 10 points, I think you've got to cut your losses with him. Disappointing, but there's a lot of other guys you can pivot to at this point that are doing better than Stroud. This is recorded prior to the Monday night game. And then Patrick Mahomes, I keep saying this over and over again, so I won't spend too much time on this, but he's just not performing at the level of the quarterbacks throughout the league. I don't think it's going to change where he's going to go back to his top 10 status at the end of the season. I know they got Carolina this week, so he does kind of fall into the intriguing stream options, but I wouldn't feel attached that you have to hold on to him is basically what I'm saying. Who do you want to hold, though? They've had some rough weeks or some tough situations. Russell Wilson, I would not drop, and he really let a lot of people down this week with his 6-point performance on Sunday. But he gets Cleveland next week. Then he gets Cincinnati, and then he gets Cleveland again. So I do think that Russell Wilson will get some better games coming up in the next few weeks. So I would not be dropping him despite the rough week 11. Sam Darnold you may be tempted to drop him just because, this was a good game he had recently, but he had a lot of duds in recent weeks. But I think that Darnold could be usable in some streaming matchups moving forward and has been effective from time to time. He gets Atlanta week 14, for example. That should be a good matchup for him, as well as Seattle in week 16. Not a quarterback I love to be a great fantasy asset for you, but I don't think you necessarily have to drop him. And then Jaden Daniels has had some down weeks. And if you're in those very shallow leagues, this sounds crazy, but do not drop him at all. There's too much potential there. Do not let the emotions of how these last two games have gone dissuade you from releasing him. And that being said, Jaden Daniels is a must start for this next week. So I'm going to talk with all these players, the guys that I feel confident in with this next week, given the matchup. So Jaden Daniels against running backs. All right, so what running backs do you want to pick up on waivers? This is a rough week for running backs, and really there's not been a lot of running back injuries this season, which is good for the teams that have elite running backs, but there's not a lot of great options you can pivot to for week 12. So I want to bring up 3 names to check if they're out there. Austin Eckler for the Washington Commanders. Eckler has shown he has been effective when Brian Robinson is there. This last week he had 8 receptions. I'm not expecting that to be the norm for him, but I think that he is a solid stream option that you can pivot to if you don't really have much else to work with. He would be the number one that I would look at to play if you have Breece Hall, Chase Brown, etc. that are all on bye this week. Bijan Robinson, etc. Austin Eckler would be the top fill-in if he's there. Number 2 for me would be Bucky Irving. Bucky Irving may have been dropped on his bye week, but Tampa Bay has the number 1 strength of schedule for running backs moving forward, and Irving is a great pass-catching specialist that will give you a lot of PPR points too. So check if Bucky Irving is out there on your waiver wire as an ad as well. And then the last name I want to bring up to check to see if they're out there first is Jonathan Brooks. Jonathan Brooks may have been dropped too on the bye week that has not played this season, and this is a big upside swing. So I wouldn't necessarily do this if you're trying to get a win, but if you're trying to, if you're in a comfortable position where you're just trying to add depth, Jonathan Brooks is a good home run swing that you could try to take. Hope that maybe he takes over the backfield right away and is just an electric rookie, but I'm not expecting that from him, especially the fact that they have Kansas City in week 12. So the number 1 running back that I would try to pick up who is less than 50% rostered is Amir Abdullah. Alexander Mattison injured, Zamir White injured in this game against the Dolphins. They get Denver this next week. And Amir Abdullah is it's hard to believe he's still in the league, but the thing that he does provide is pass catching capabilities. And I think against Denver, where it's difficult to run against them, they may be dumping it down to Amir Abdullah quite often that he could give you a consistent enough floor. And again, there's not a lot of great options out there, but if Abdullah is the starter and the other 2 guys are not playing, I think that he would be the number 1 pickup and somebody that you could probably start for this week, although it would not be an ideal option for you. I'm going to bring up 3 names of guys that are all backups but had an increase in volume this past week that makes them intriguing. Number 1, Jaylen Warren. And as I predicted, when the Steelers are in situations where they cannot run the ball very efficiently, they're going to try to get Warren incorporated. Warren is a good change of pace back who will give you a consistent floor every week. So this is a great option that you could plug into your flex or last running back position if you need to cover for this heavy bye week in week 12. And I think you would it would just give you a safe, consistent play right around 8 to 10 points that you could walk away and be happy that it wasn't 0. Roschon Johnson has also seen an increase. He got in his volume. He got a touchdown this past week, 42% of snaps. So he's getting a little more involved. Don't love him as a start, but he's somebody worth picking up and monitoring to see if he maybe takes this backfield from DeAndre Swift as the season progresses. And then same thing with Cam Akers, who got a receiving touchdown in this game and also had 37% of the snaps. This one I'm a little less optimistic about. I think that this is still Aaron Jones' backfield moving forward, but Akers is still intriguing to see if he can eat into any of Aaron Jones' minutes. So he's somebody that should be added, especially if you have Jones. Audric Estime, this one was rough. Sean Payton so 2 weeks ago, week 10, Estime had 14 carries, and the next running back had 2. And then this week, it was just a complete opposite, and Javonte Williams got the majority of carries. So it's frustrating, but the upside for Estime is that they do get Las Vegas this week. And I think that this is going to be a game where they're going to be dominating, and maybe Estime can give you a lot of early down work, get a goal line touchdown to make this a salvageable play. But I definitely feel a lot less comfortable with him than I did going into this week 11 matchup. Jerome Ford is interesting too because Cleveland has just a gauntlet of teams that they have to play on defense, starting with the Steelers this upcoming week. But then they also have Kansas City and then I believe Denver in there as well. So they have a lot of difficult matchups coming up, but this means that Ford could be more involved as the pass catching back. I'll talk about Nick Chubb in just a sec, but Ford at least could be interesting, but I'm ranking all these guys as running backs in the order that I like them. So I would still rather have Estime than Ford, just in the hope that, the rookie has more potential that Jerome Ford doesn't have. But it's a name to monitor. And then other 2 names to monitor in deep leagues are Jalen Wright of the Dolphins, has overtaken the number 2 role in the running back field for Miami. They get New England this week, which is tough, but he's worth monitoring if anything were to happen to Etienne. And then Tajay Spears, he may not play in week 12 dealing with a concussion, but from week 13 to 17, he gets that same schedule that I talked about with Will Levis that includes Jacksonville twice, Cincinnati, Indianapolis, just an incredible gold mine. So if they're shifting this backfield to Tajay Spears to see what they have with him rather than Tony Pollard, he's a very intriguing option moving forward. Who can you drop at running backs? And ideally at running back, you are not looking to drop your depth at that position, but these are names that I think you can safely drop at this point. Raheem Mostert. Let's start with the easy ones. He can definitely go. Justice Hill, same thing, can definitely go. These ones are a little bit harder than these next 3. Nick Chubb. So glad that he's playing football again, but the bottom line is that Cleveland is not a good team. Nick Chubb is not a pass-catching back. So the way that everything is breaking out for him is that they're being game scripted out of the situations where they need to use Nick Chubb. Their O-line is also not as good as it was last year and in years past. So with that schedule coming up that they have a really rough schedule. I'll go through exactly what Nick Chubb has, but I think based on his schedule that he has moving forward, it's not worth continuing to roster him because I really don't see the situation changing. They have Pittsburgh in week 12. Then they get Denver. Then they get Pittsburgh. Then they get Kansas City. So that's 12 to 15. Those are all weeks in which it looks pretty bad. And I mean, maybe they get Cincinnati in week 16. So maybe that can change things. But do you really think that Cleveland is going to be up on Cincinnati and just being able to run the ball down their throat? I don't really feel confident in that formula happening. So to me, Nick Chubb is a drop. Sad to say, but I do not think that he's somebody that you have to roster at this point in the season in fantasy. Jordan Mason as well. There was an argument to be made that Mason could be splitting work with McCaffrey, but he only got 3% of snaps and 2 carries this week. So I think the only reason that Mason should be rostered at this point is if you have McCaffrey. If you have a very deep league and you want to stash him as a handcuffed, I don't have a problem with that. But I don't think you can, if you're in a situation where you need to pick up guys that can help you win. Right now, Jordan Mason is not doing that. And then Travis Etienne, as I already talked about, is a drop candidate if you have about a 6-5 record or worse and you need to get wins. But my running back holds, as I already talked about with Etienne, hold him if you have a winning record because, he is still the number 1 running back in Jacksonville, despite how bad that team is right now. So you do not ideally want to send somebody like that to the waivers. But if you are in a position where you could safely put him on your bench until he starts to show signs of life, there's nothing wrong with doing that. I would also hold Jonathan Taylor and Aaron Jones. And both of these guys have had really struggled in week 11 and have overall not had great seasons relative to the expectations that you may have had of them. But I'm not really worried about either of them. So I just say that as a confidence, do not be tempted into the idea of dropping them. Even Jonathan Taylor, with Anthony Richardson, I still feel like he's still going to be a top 20 running back rest of the season, despite the fact that Anthony Richardson can possibly take some of his rushing touches away. Tony Pollard, I would hold on to as well. And then Audric Estime, as I've already said, the matchup against Vegas is interesting enough to me that I would want to continue to see if, maybe Estime does get more carries again this next week. But this is really rough development that he wasn't more involved. So the running backs that I like, wide receivers. So the guys you want to check to see if they're out there that are over 50% rostered. First, Jerry Jeudy. Jerry Jeudy has had some nice performances the past few weeks with Jameis Winston. And with these Browns receivers in general, it seems like you're not really going to get consistency with any one of the 3. You're going to have potentially great games with any of the 3 at a given time, being Elijah Moore, Jerry Jeudy, and Cedric Tillman, or you may have some down games. But I do think that the fact that they're all getting at least 8 targets means that they all should be rostered. So Jerry Jeudy, especially make sure that you have him, but still the same thing with Elijah Moore and Cedric Tillman. These are all guys that should be rostered and are all kind of in that flex tier range of guys that you could play on a given week. Jawan Jennings should also be rostered as well. His roster percentage is also pretty low relative to the way that he's been playing. He's only 68.8% rostered, should be up in the 90s at this point. He's the best wide receiver on the 49ers, and you should treat him as a top 20 wide receiver moving forward. Then the other name I want to bring up that you want to check is Xavier Legette. And I've talked about him a lot, so I won't spend a lot of time on him, but number 1 wide receiver on the Panthers. They have a nice strength of schedule moving forward. They're going to try to get him involved, try to develop their young guys. So I like Xavier Legette to, as somebody that may have been dropped on his bye in week 11, he's only 40% rostered. So he would be the number 1 if he's out there to get Xavier Legette, in my opinion, for this upcoming week. Another name that's kind of a light version of that who may have been dropped on his bye is Wan'Dale Robinson. I don't think that you get a lot of high-end upside with him. And again, the quarterback change is a little bit concerning with what his involvement will be. But he got 8 targets right before their bye week. So Wan'Dale Robinson is interesting too, but he doesn't fall into my top 3. So number 1 would be Legette. Number 2 would be, I'm just going to lump both Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore into the same 2A, 2B, because both of them, I think, are good dart throws that have a lot of targets from Jameis Winston, but are a little more risky of a play. And then my number 3 would be Christian Watson of the Packers. He's a little streaky as well. So he doesn't really get the target consistency that I would like him over those Browns receivers. But he caught 4 catches for 150 in this past game. And hopefully if Jordan Love can continue to spread the field, Christian Watson can continue to get involved. It looks like he's back and healthy again. So if Watson's out there, he should be rostered. And then my 4th honorable mention name, Mike Williams. So I mentioned him as a start or as a stash for this upcoming week, despite the number 32 ranked schedule, because he's still getting integrated into the offense. And sure enough, he didn't get targeted because he's still getting integrated into the offense. But that said, like that same schedule I've talked about with Pickens and Russell Wilson, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Cleveland is extremely attractive for wide receivers. So maybe Mike Williams can learn the system. You don't have to spend any fab on him, especially since he had a 0 in this past game. But I think he could be a very sneaky play to pick up at wide receiver. And then a very sneaky name, too, I talked about as well in my videos over the weekend, is Devon Vele, who also, he got another 5 targets in this game. He caught a nice pass up the middle. This Broncos offense is starting to really look awesome. And they get Vegas. So I think Vele is he's the most consistent of the number 2 options that they have at receiver. Then I would go with Franklin. Then I would go with Little Jordan Humphrey as the 3 receivers that I'm looking at on the Broncos. They all had solid games this past week, but a little bit streaky because not off a lot of volume. And then 2 players that are on a bye this week that are interesting to monitor moving forward, but I would not be rushing to pick up, are Marcus Valdez-Scantling and Curtis Samuel of the Buffalo Bills, who had his best game of the season. I'm not really as much interested in Samuel, but MVS is interesting to me because of the fact that he is the number 1 wide receiver right now on that team. But as I've said many times, he's somebody that I would be looking to sell in a trade if you can still trade. I wouldn't feel confident rostering him because I don't feel like I would ever feel confident playing him. But again, they don't have a lot of options. But I would try to go elsewhere than Marcus Valdez-Scantling personally. The drop candidates, I already talked to Amari Cooper, so I won't spend a lot of time on him. Deontay Johnson should be dropped. And I predicted this back when he got traded to the Ravens that he would be a droppable player potentially. And now it's clear and obvious that, he's getting out targeted by guys like Tylan Wallace. It's just like you just got to cut ties with Deontay Johnson, especially in the redraft leagues. Jalen Waddle is approaching this territory as well. He has excellent upside that I would not ideally want to cut him. But Miami has either the 31st or the 32nd schedule rest of the way at the wide receiver position. So all of this looks very bad for Waddle moving forward. I think if you had the choice between some of these names I listed, like Xavier Legette, I would rather have Legette than Jalen Waddle. If you would rather pick between, taking a shot on Judy or Elijah Moore over Jalen Waddle, I would take them as well over Jalen Waddle. I would not go as far as Christian Watson and Mike Williams. So it's kind of dependent on who's out there and what your other options are on your team. But Waddle, really a huge disappointment relative to where he was drafted. Tyler Lockett is now a drop. Romeo Doubs is a drop as well. And then Ricky Pearsall. I had high hopes for you, but when you follow up your opportunity with the 0, it's hard to trust you again. So he's a drop candidate too. Hold Calvin Ridley despite a kind of disappointing game because he also had a 50-yard touchdown called back due to a penalty if you didn't watch the game. So that's the other thing. And then I've already said that same schedule with Will Levis, and that applies to Calvin Ridley, who has all those matchups are particularly bad against the pass. So Ridley to me is going to be fine as a top 20 receiver rest of the way. I'm holding him. I'm also holding Cedric Tillman despite kind of a disappointing game. I still think he's the best wide receiver on that Browns team moving forward. So I would not be trying to cut him. Same with Hopkins, down game, but I do think that Hopkins is going to be fine. He's still their number 1 wide receiver too. It just may not give you that elite performances that you were expecting when he played that Tampa Bay game. Deebo Samuel. I've never been a Deebo guy in fantasy because he's very inconsistent, but I would not be trying to drop him either. And then Devonta Smith, you may be kind of upset about these past 2 games, but I'm not worried about him either. I would not be trying to cut him. So the guys that I would be looking to start for All right. And then at tight end, who are the guys that you want to pick up? So there are 3 that I really like to pick up for this week, and I will rank them in this order: Jonnu Smith, Will Disley, and Taysom Hill. So I'll start with Jonnu Smith. Heavily involved these last few weeks. Jonnu has he's somebody that I talked about briefly as a solid safe play, but the way he performed this week, that was incredible. So if you played him, I'm sure you were happy with that. But Jonnu Smith, the last several weeks, has been very involved in the offense. 8 targets in week 5. And in every game since week 5, he's had at least 6 full PPR points. He had 11 in week 5 off 8 targets, 22 in week 7 off 7 targets. He had 6 targets against Arizona that led to 6 points. 9 points off 6 targets in week 9. 7 points off 4 targets in week 10, and then 28 against Vegas. So that's a little bit of an outlier, but the thing that I like about him is that he's always giving you consistent target involvement. So this is the same thing that we talk about with the tight ends that I like to go after, the ones that are consistently getting targeted week in and week out, not the ones that are like fluke plays like Sam Laporta or Dalton Kincaid, where they kind of get targets here and there and generally disappoint you. So now Jonnu Smith is in that tier where he is definitely attractive rest of season as somebody that you want to play. I'm not expecting that these performances like 28 are going to continue. It's probably going to be more like somewhere between 7 to 10. But that can be all you need sometimes, especially if you have a tight end on bye this week that you've been relying on. Number 2 would be Will Disley. And Will Disley, to me, so Jonnu Smith is getting about 90% of the snaps, which I do really like. Will Disley is only getting about 57 generally per week. But Will Disley has the number 1 schedule for tight ends rest of the season. He gets Baltimore in week 12. Then he gets Atlanta, Kansas City, and Tampa Bay, which all 4 of those matchups are so good for tight ends. So Will Disley, again, same thing. He's every week, in 5 of the last 6 weeks, he's gotten at least 5 targets. 5, 11, 7, 3, 6, and 6. And that's even with Quentin Johnson back. Got a nice touchdown in this game as well. I think Will Disley is in that tier of like top 12 fringe potential the rest of the way. I do have him outside of my rankings just because of the track record of Will Disley and the fact that there's some other guys ahead of him that are more talented. But if you're going off of the schedule and the upside, Will Disley has an argument to be top 12 rest of the way. So both him and Jonnu Smith are excellent pickups at tight end that you can use in week 12. And then Taysom Hill is 3rd because he's not playing this week for 1. And then 2, I'm as I've already said, I'm just not convinced that this is going to be the norm. I do really like the fact that Darren Rizzi, the new coach, is getting him involved. And if a lot of my opinion can change based on what happens in week 13. If he gets somewhere around 10 targets again, if like Chris Olave is still out and then they decide to keep using Taysom Hill the way they have been, then we're having a completely different conversation. But historically, Taysom Hill has done this throughout his career where he has these amazing games and then everybody spends all their fab to get him and then he follows it up with absolutely nothing for several weeks in a row. He is extremely frustrating to rely upon. So I'm hopeful that, this new coaching staff, Dennis Allen obviously was not doing a very good job of managing this. They can utilize Taysom Hill as they should. But until that actually happens, I'm a little more skeptical. So that's why he's only 3rd on my list. And then some other guys I want to bring up on the fringe. Hunter Henry got 9 targets in this past game. He's very interesting as well. Zach Ertz gets Dallas this week, which should be a good opportunity to stream him. And then Jatavian Sanders, who I've talked about quite a bit. Everything that I said about Leggett also applies to the rookie Sanders, the tight end in Carolina, who is also playing Kansas City, who struggles against tight ends. And they have a void that they need for a second wide receiver. And I think there's a good argument that Sanders could fill that. Noah Gray, I would not be interested in despite his 2 touchdown game. That was a fluke. drop candidates, Cole Kmet is a drop for me. Dalton Kincaid is also a drop, especially given the bye. Mike Gesicki, as I've already talked about. And then Tucker Kraft, to me, is a drop too. He was very productive early in the season because of touchdown dependency. But now that all the Packers receivers are healthy again, we saw that Tucker Kraft was kind of phased out. He only got one target and didn't catch a pass. I'd still hold Engram and Pitts if you can. I don't feel like you have to, but I would still be trying to hold on to them. And then same with Mark Andrews. I'd be trying to hold him because I think that there's just too much value overall that can make him very interesting as an option, not only to trade, but maybe you could put him in spot starts. But Andrews is definitely, to me, as I've already talked about in the trade video, not a top 10 tight end rest of the way. Defenses to pick up for week 12. So check if Kansas City was dropped because they get Carolina, and if they're out there, that's easily the number one pickup. I've already said that Buffalo may be dropped because of the bye, so that's more of a long-term play. Other good short-term options you could look at are Denver against Los Angeles if they happen to still be out there. And among the lightly rostered options, Washington gets Dallas, and then a very sneaky option that has been a kind of a poor defense throughout the season, but could really turn things on because of the matchups that they have. Tampa Bay, they get the Giants, which quarterback change. Carolina, which quarterback change. Then they get Las Vegas, which quarterback change multiple times. So those are all incredibly juicy matchups in the 3 weeks we have left leading up to the playoffs. They get the Chargers in week 15, so you're not going to use them that week. But then they get Dallas in week 16, which, by that point, they may have Trey Lance in there, which, I mean, that's obviously great for whatever defense they're playing against him. And then they get Carolina again. So the schedule is right there for this to be amazing. And they've got some talent on that defense. If they get everybody healthy, they got some of their guys healthy after the bye and can kind of figure some things out over the next few weeks, this could really be an awesome stream for you. And then I will talk about kickers. So the two guys that I have here in this video are my two infamous people that I talk about frequently, Evan McPherson and Justin Tucker himself, as kickers that are consistently drafted in the top 5 at their position, and their ADP for where they're getting drafted is just ridiculous year in and year out. McPherson was going as the second kicker in a lot of leagues. Justin Tucker has routinely been going number 1 for years, but both these guys really struggled on Sunday, and I think it really encapsulates everything that we need to know about the kicker position in terms of how you manage it at the beginning of the season and when you draft your kicker. You can go back and you can watch a video where I talk about this in depth, but Justin Tucker is taken early every single year, and it's really just never worth the value because Justin Tucker, the amount of points that he gives you is not worth the range that you could be taking a backup running back. You could have gotten a Chase Brown this year. You could have gotten a Chuba Hubbard. You could have gotten a Jawan Jennings. You could have gotten a J.K. Dobbins. Guys like that. But then if you reach for Justin Tucker and you missed out on those guys, then you basically cost yourself a wasted position because Justin Tucker on the season is only the he's only the kicker 7 on the season. So and most of the times the kicker 7 is somebody that should be drafted in the last round, but Justin Tucker is often going 6 rounds from the last round. And then same with Evan McPherson, who's even more of a fraud. So I mean, if I was watching that Bengals game, and it was honestly kind of a weird situation because in fantasy I was playing against McPherson, but as I've said, grew up in Cincinnati, primarily a Commanders fan, but I'm also a Bengals fan too. I like them to do well, root for my former hometown. But I was so frustrated, even though McPherson missed those field goals and it kind of helped me in fantasy, I was just how can you literally miss, this guy has missed 4 straight field goals from 50. There's many kickers in this league that can hit from 60 routinely, including Brandon Aubrey, who is often being taken behind most of these guys. So McPherson at this point is somebody that should definitely not be drafted, but I guarantee you that both Tucker and McPherson are going to be top 5 in their ADP next year. And it doesn't make any sense. I'd say, well, top 5 at their position. Maybe McPherson kind of on the fence of that. But both these guys are going to get drafted next year, and they're just not going to be good value. And you look at the number 1 kicker on the season, who was not drafted in the majority of leagues. He was a waiver wire pickup that if you got him, he was the number 1 kicker. He had 6 field goals on the week. He outkicked the next best kicker by 10 points, Chris Boswell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. This guy is just automatic, it seems, despite bad weather for this team. And he never gets drafted. And that's the thing that you have to do with fantasy, is that when I am drafting, I do not draft a kicker if I don't have to. The first time I add a kicker on my team is on Sunday, right before week 1. Because then you could pick up a guy like a Chris Boswell, like an Austin Seibert, like a few years ago, Brandon Aubrey, last year actually. That you get these guys off waivers that you never suspect are going to be elite kickers, because you can never predict this stuff with kickers. They are the most volatile position in fantasy football. And I think week 11, when we saw Tucker and McPherson specifically struggle this week to connect on field goals, and it cost both their teams the win, encapsulates everything that I've been saying about the kicker position in fantasy football, that you should not be drafting them high at all, let alone you should probably not be drafting them in the first place. I have a video where I talk about this in more depth, but I just wanted to passionately put that out there because this week in football explained this concept perfectly. So that's all that I've got for this week. If you like videos like this, please subscribe to my channel. And if you have any questions, drop your comments below. I reply to all my commenters. And the purpose of this video and this channel is to help you win a fantasy football championship. All right. Well, I'll see you guys next time. We'll have a video coming out this weekend talking about start sit. Hope you guys have a great week. See you guys next time. Bye.